Hi, good afternoon. This is Chris Praedel, Executive Director of Community Homeworks here in Kalamazoo. We're a nonprofit organization who have been around since 2009, and we are in existence for really two primary reasons. We provide critical home repair services for income-eligible households who have health or safety repair needs in their home, and we also provide empowering education. What part of our wing for providing empowering education is we have partnered with various nonprofits that are somehow tied and involved in the work that we're doing. And we have been working with our nonprofits to live stream these Let's Talk Housing series. And the goal of our Let's Talk Housing series has really been very much to make sure that we can share all the great work that's going on in the housing community and all the work that's yet to be done. And really bring in some of the leading experts who are engaged in this work in our community, so that we can provide a resource to the community and more education about what is going on. So anyways, we are incredibly excited to be here today with our guest, Komal Razvi. And Komal is the Director of Community Health at the YWCA for Cradle Kalamazoo. I have had a really great honor to get to know you a little bit over the last year and some work that we've been doing together. And I've learned a tremendous amount from Komal, and I'm so grateful for your patience and kindness working with us. And I just wanted to thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I want to get started here. I know one of the things that is interesting for people to know is a little bit of background about our guests, so the community can get to know you even more as a figure doing this work in the community. I'd love for you to take a moment and share how you personally got involved in the community health field.
Yes, absolutely. Honestly, it's a little bit difficult for me to remember a time where I wasn't involved in community health or public health in some capacity, whether it was formal or informal. But I would say what really led me to become so involved in community health is I've seen what it's like when people don't invest in community health and well-being, particularly maternal and infant health. I've had many personal life experiences that allowed me to personally see what it's like when communities invest in public health and when communities don't invest in public health, particularly infant health. Looking for ways to advance equity, to advance public health and health in some way, shape, or form, whether that was volunteering or personally donating to funds that I believed in, and then leading to formal education in public health and working at the Ministry of Health in Egypt, and then eventually here at Cradle. So public health has always been my thing and always will be my thing, I'm pretty confident to say.
Yeah, that's great. I that's one thing that I so appreciate about, there's so many people who are in professions where, they're in their work, they're in their world, but you can definitely feel and sense that your passion about the work that you do when you hear you speak and you're involved in community conversations and whatnot. So thank you for that. So kind of based on that a little bit, what is your favorite part of working on community health issues, specifically as it relates to expectant mothers and babies in our community?
I would say My favorite part of working on community health would be when we see change. Um, Working in the field of public health, particularly around pregnant and parenting people, it can be a little bit bleak sometimes when we see things like poor infant health outcomes, and that is by far the most challenging part of the job. Um, which means then that the most rewarding part is when I see community organizations, when I see partnerships forming and change occurring. Kind of like when I see the light bulb go off in community partners' minds of, hey, this is what I can do to protect pregnant and parenting people. This is what I can do to protect babies. Um, and just seeing that momentum behind it is very gratifying and really what this is all about, right? So that's probably the most exciting part.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, could you tell us a little bit about like the YWCA and Cradle and the work that you're both undertaking, right here in our community, and the work that you're doing to try to improve health outcomes and for babies and mothers?
Absolutely. So health outcomes for pregnant and parenting families and babies, it's a very complex it's a very complex need in our community. So the solutions for it have to be equally complex. And that's why Cradle Kalamazoo was created. It was founded by the YWCA as a collective impact model, which is essentially what it sounds like. It's where a lot of different community organizations commit to addressing a community crisis. In our case, is infant mortality. Um, so Cradle Kalamazoo is, as I mentioned, complex. We have a lot of different work groups that are committed to reducing our overall infant mortality rate and completely eliminating the racial disparities that we see in them. So Cradle has work groups around safe sleep education and trainings, reproductive health, particularly around things like birth spacing, health equity, where we focus on shifting policies across our various sectors in the community. We have a frontline team, which I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about in a moment, but really just bridging community resources. Um, and the YWCA is at the forefront of managing that and the operational support and making sure the community gets what they need.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, and to speak to that, we'll get to that a little bit further in some of the questions, but, just as an observer in being a part, with community homeworks, even just attending the frontline meetings and, hearing some of the advocacy presentations, it's very powerful. And it's so great that the community can be a part of that work and work collectively towards working on an issue together. So, can you speak to that? We were talking about infant mortality, and I was just wondering if you could speak to our higher than national average rate of infant mortality, and especially as it relates to racial disparities in our community.
Absolutely. So infant mortality rates are like a moving target, right? They fluctuate like the rate of anything does from year to year. So what we do in Cradle Kalamazoo is we explore the trends. We look at clustered years to give us an idea of, or as I like to say, a pulse on infant mortality throughout time. And Kalamazoo has consistently, historically, had infant mortality rates that are higher than not only state average, but also national average. While that rate has been trending downward in recent years, again, when I mentioned that it can fluctuate up and down, we can't just look at 1 year and say we're doing great. We need to look at trends. We need to look at historical data. So just when we look at an overall infant mortality rate, what we do in Cradle is we take it a step further. We say, okay, we got the rate. Now, what does it look like by race, ethnicity? Because that is a very different picture, right? And that's the case with any kind of disparity, not just infant mortality. So let's say, for example, if our national rate of infant mortality is like 5.5, and if we see in Kalamazoo County the rate is at 5, we shouldn't be so quick to celebrate and say we've got rates that are under national averages. Let's look at that and tease it apart. And then the picture is not so celebratory. So, for example, when we look at our infant mortality rates for white babies, we see that the rate is around our most recent trends for the last 3 years has been around 3.2. That is below national average, definitely something to celebrate. However, we should also then look at the infant mortality rate for Black babies, and what we're seeing that has been at 12, hovering around 12, even
Wow.
14 in some of the recent years. Not something to be very proud of, not something to be celebrating, right? So when
Right.
people ask about infant mortality rates, I always dig in deeper and say infant mortality rates for whom?
Hmm.
Because while it might be lower than national and state averages for some, that's not the case for babies of color.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's powerful that you're doing that deep dive into the issue. And specifically, I mean, what do you find are primary root causes to that disparity? um,
Well, I wish there was one particular cause or one solid cause, because then you can find like a silver bullet and address it. But it's not like that. Infant mortality is a very complex crisis. Um, and we know that our leading causes of infant mortality are things like unsafe sleep related deaths, premature births, or preterm births. But
mhm.
then one can't simply say, okay, well, then let's stop preterm births and let's stop or like low birth weights, cases of low birth weight. We have to dig and go beneath the iceberg. There are
Mhm.
things that drive um, the fact that women of color have higher rates of preterm births, have higher rates of low birth weight babies. Speaking
Yeah.
from experience, I have never had a healthy gestational age baby. I've never had a term baby, right?
Yeah.
Um, and these are perpetuated by factors like toxic stress, the hypervigilance that women of color have to endure, the working twice as hard and achieving half as much. Those systems build upon each other, where these infants are being born with the odds stacked against them from the very beginning. So
Yeah.
it's not something as simple as hospitals having early appointments and that being it. We have to look at housing. We have to look at employment. We have to look at nutrition. We have to look
Hmm.
at resource provision. Um, so there's so many causes driving this, which means our solutions have to be complex too.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And really, when you're talking about that racial disparity, I mean, really, you could call it just systemic racism, right? I mean, like that's generated those things throughout generations and cycles. So that fomented into those different issues that you talked about as roots. So yeah, absolutely. So I'll maybe break this up into two questions because I was going to ask you a little bit about if you could talk about Cradle's Health Equity Subcommittee and the role of that group in the community, and then maybe talk a little bit about the Cradle Frontline group and share a little bit about the work of both of those bodies.
Absolutely. These are two strategy areas in Cradle that are absolutely fundamental to systems change. So, the Health Equity Subcommittee, a subcommittee that I co chair, we focus on the upstream approaches to reducing infant mortality rates and addressing the racial disparities. Okay, so we have clinical equity teams, which are essentially work groups across our four health systems that are committed to shaping policy and structures and practices to be more equitable for things like clinical access. However, public health research shows that health outcomes are impacted by the clinical sphere only 10 to 20% of the time. The remaining comes from social sectors, from housing, from employment, right?
Mhm.
From access to or the interconnectedness of community resources. So that's what the health equity team focuses on, really having these crucial, critical, unapologetic conversations with community
Yeah.
organizations about what is your role in the infant mortality crisis. And simply put, all of us, everyone has a role in the infant mortality crisis in either supporting good health outcomes or perpetuating poor ones. So that's what our health equity team does. I think that's how we came in contact
Yeah.
together for
Yeah.
that interconnectedness between infant mortality and housing.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we work on, driving change in community organizations for really helping them see the infant mortality problem as being their problem as well. So
Mhm.
that's a little bit about the health equity team.
Mhm.
Frontline addresses a critical concern that has been lifted by what we're seeing in our themes of fetal infant mortality review cases, which is essentially the cases of the babies that we lost in our community. And one of the, or when the left hand doesn't know that the right hand even exists. So the frontline teams work on bridging that gap between clinic and community, and leading a home visitation network to take the care to community members in their home or where they're currently residing, to help bridge that gap, link them to resources, guide them, and serve as advocates in the clinical space.
Yeah, it's really impressive group. We had a chance. We were very gracious to invite us to speak as an organization, just so all the entities that were part of it again could communicate with each other and learn about the resources that are out there to refer to families. And it was neat to be a part of that and learn all the great organizations and individuals that were a part of that frontline group. Hats off to you and everyone for putting that group together. Next up, I was hoping to ask you a little bit about if you could speak a little bit about housing environments and the impact it has on particularly on mothers and babies, especially like preterm and post-term birth. Might be a little frozen there, but Kamal, can you hear us okay? It looks like we lost Kamal there for a little minute here. Maybe she'll bounce back here. But one of the questions that I'd asked was just about housing environments, and one of the really, I guess I'll take a step back here. We largely became connected with Kamal and Cradle Kalamazoo when she really opened our eyes to the fact that, wow, the work that we're doing in the community really is potentially playing a role in maternal and infant health. And it really opened our eyes in terms of the environmental impacts, whether it be air quality or temperature in the home. And so through just attending an educational session through Cradle, just really opened our eyes to this work. And so we look at a good example of for us as an organization where say if we get a call from a young family or a young parent with a 2-week-old baby in the middle of January, and the temperature in the home is reducing significantly because of the cold, first instinct of a parent might be to potentially put more blankets on or co-sleep in some of those situations that might put a baby at higher risk of harm, even if it was unintended. So I know that was something that we really talked about as organizations. And so, that really led us to kind of examine our work and how we can mobilize faster for young families, especially families that have babies in the home or expectant mothers in the home. So it really enabled us to, as an organization, kind of re-examine our intake process and really prioritize cases where we had really vulnerable situations with babies in the home. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit later to see if we get Kamal here back. But anyway, so just to give our viewers a little background about this relationship that we've had, because the thing that's so interesting about this relationship and partnership that we've had with Kamal and with Cradle is we're two organizations that typically, funders or the public might not look like they're necessarily one and the same, and working on an issue. They would look at us and say, oh, they're a housing organization. And they might look at Cradle and say, oh, Cradle is more focused on, health outcomes or wellness outcomes. But the reality is, it's kind of like Kamal was saying earlier, it's like that we're so interconnected in so many of these issues, and tearing down those silos to try to really work together to, again, like she said, making us all responsible for issues that are of great concern in our community. Anyways, I just wanted to share a little bit of that while we wait here to see if she can come back here. And we appreciate for viewers the just technical difficulty, but this is one of the realities of doing live broadcast. So let's see if we can hear Komal again. Komal, are you there? All right. Looks like we're having trouble with the sound there again. But anyways, while we're waiting to get Komal back, I'm going to share a little bit about this partnership with them. So after the presentation that we had with Komal and with some housing advocates as well, we really, felt like we play a role in this work. And I know we have a number of individuals in our staff, including myself, who are incredibly passionate about young, small children and youth. And we, we came together and we looked at our intake process, and we also worked together to put together a recent grant. And the goal with the grant was to really minimize the wait times if there was a situation with an expectant mom or a baby or small children in the household. And so, so we put in this grant request, and we have a new, basically test trial run grant to use that we're underway with right now. And we put in that grant request, and the goal is if in a situation where it's dire or urgent or imminent for the safety of an expectant mother or small children in the home, it'll enable us to minimize the amount of paperwork that would typically be required and documentation, and will enable us to use whoever can get there the fastest. And so it's relatively new. We just started this partnership in this work, and we've already helped one household with just a pretty incredible story. But we are incredibly grateful to try this out and see if we can do our part as an organization to try to support infant health and wellness in our community as well. So Komal, are you there? Can you hear me okay? Let's see. Oh, I heard you there a little bit. Komal, can you hear me? All right. We'll try here a little bit better, a little bit more here, and we'll talk a little bit more while we're waiting here. And Komal, if you hop on, feel free to talk at any point. We can see if you're hopping on there. So anyway, so we have this grant, and we are underway with it. Like I mentioned, we were awarded the grant here in June. We've already helped one family. The grant, since it's in a pilot test phase, we have enough funding for in the next year to support 12 to 15 households with situations, again, where there's an expectant mother or a small child in the home. And we're really trying to, prioritize those and make sure that we can move swiftly and urgently, because one thing that we know is as much of a blessing as federal grant funding can be for critical home repair projects, it can be really burdensome on households. And you can imagine, especially being a new parent, how difficult, how difficult it can be to, go out and make appointments to get paperwork or documentation or get your application filled out. And so we're really trying to do as much as possible to minimize those barriers and really not have those barriers be a reason not to get into homes and help as quickly as possible. Komal, can you hear me again? All right. Yeah, it looks like we're still having a little bit of technical difficulty. Like I say, I apologize about that. I know that Komal is on here, but for some reason the sound isn't coming through, and the video is not. But anyways, we appreciate your patience again. I know this is a really important topic, and we're glad that you're tuned in with us to hear a little bit more. So anyways, until we get back here, again, I'll mention that we're trying this out. This is a new strategy that we're trying to implement. It's really part of a strategy of Community Homeworks about us trying to think outside the box and significantly think about reduction of barriers and really just systems change as a community, looking at particularly vulnerable households that may have nowhere else to go because of the challenges of ordinary paperwork and ordinary grant funds and funding structures. So it's really about kind of just dismantling some structures that existed for a long time in our community, and just proving that these funding strategies and approaches do really make a difference. So there's that. I hope to report back more on that. If you get a chance, if you want to go to communityhomeworks.org, there's actually a little article talking a little bit more about this new intervention strategy that we have on our website as well. And, really just looking at, how important quality and safe housing is to our community, and how foundational it is to so many outcomes, not just maternal wellness, infant mortality and well-being, those sort of things as well. And we're really trying to take them one piece at a time and look at different things. And a couple examples of some other things that we're working on right now. We're working on code enforcement. We know that code enforcement in communities can sometimes disproportionately, or I should say many times, disproportionately impacts lower income homeowners. And seeing what we can do to work on that and prevent people from facing fines or not being able to tackle issues on their home. We're also working on a universal application right now with one of our major housing partners to prevent homeowners to having to fill out two separate applications and go to two separate nonprofits to get support and help. And we are also working on historic preservation, because we know there are some homeowners that struggle to keep their homes up to the historic specifications to remain in their homes in historic districts. And so we've piloted a program this year that we're working on that with some homeowners as well. So, this is just one strategy we wanted to bring in front of our followers and our viewers today, and see if, we can just share a little bit more about that. But again, if you go to communityhomeworks.org, scroll to the bottom, we have some news stories posted, and we have an article posted about this partnership as well, if you want to learn a little bit more. And even though I have learned a lot and can speak pretty confidently about these issues, I'm hoping we can get Komal back here in a moment and have her talk a little bit about those as well. If you are particularly interested and passionate in what we're talking about, I encourage you to get in touch with us or get in touch with YWCA. You can reach YWCA at ywcakalamazoo.org. And they actually, up in the right-hand corner, have a little orange heart with a little donate button. And you can also support them in the great work that they're doing as well here in our community. And I'm sure as well, Komal would love to hear from you if you want to learn more or somehow find out how to get involved. But we're hoping if we get her back, we'll ask a little bit more about that as well. And then along these lines, we want to encourage the community, if you're ever in doubt and of a household that has a situation that may have a health or safety concern that could impact someone, we encourage you to reach out to us to see if we can help out. All right, we have Komal back. Hey.
Sorry about that. I don't know.
No, they just, way more interesting to hear from the expert than me rambling. So I'm glad you're back. And, so anyways, we were talking a little bit, I think we left off, we were talking a little bit about the Cradle Frontline group. We just talked a little bit about that. I can't remember if we had a chance to finish on that. Do you mind talking, just in case we got cut off there, do you mind talking a little bit more about the Cradle Frontline group and the role that group is playing in the community?
Yes, absolutely. I will, just for the sake of bandwidth and avoiding that from happening again, I'll keep my camera off.
Okay.
But the Frontline team is really critical in addressing one of the causes that was lifted very frequently from our fetal infant mortality cases, that is fragmented systems of care. We have lots of resources in our community, but they're not exactly interconnected, particularly when it comes to bridging the gap between clinic and community. So the Frontline team is created to include a network of home visitation programs. So that's community health workers, home visitors that really take the care, the services, the resources directly to the homes of clients and make sure that resource provision is occurring that way, so that the care that ends at the doorstep of the clinics can then be extended into the community and into the homes of clients, so that they're not slipping between the cracks.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for that. And the question we were just about to ask as well, can you speak a little bit about how like housing environments can impact, pre and preterm and post birth, you know, uh, outcomes?
Oh, most definitely. The connection between housing environments and infant health outcomes is a direct connection. Research shows that there's three pathways for how housing can impact infant health or lead specifically to poor infant health. We can look at that from the neighborhood perspective, the affordability or general stability perspective, and then that of poor housing conditions. So on the neighborhood perspective, that refers to things like neighborhoods that are under-resourced or not having access to nutritious food, or neighborhoods that are unsafe, lots of violence, so that there's less opportunity to be outdoors and to practice exercise, things that are conducive to healthier birth outcomes or healthier postpartum outcomes. Um, on the affordability and stability side of things, housing is by far for most people, the biggest expense that anyone has in a household, right? And the stress of the cost burden, the chronic threat of instability, having to move very frequently because the rent is hiked up from one year to the other. So not being able to have a stable housing environment from one year to the next. And then the looming risk of eviction or homelessness if you're not able to afford rent, though it's important to note here that rent is at a historic high. So this is something that many, many people, pregnant people included, are worrying about every day. And then the other pathway to poor health conditions is that of poor housing conditions themselves. So things like low or poor temperature control, right? Heat not being included or being unaffordable. So people are not able to afford heat. So they're bundling their babies in blankets, trying to keep them warm. Overcrowding or pests in the housing unit, or unaccountable landlords that have housing conditions that are not conducive to pregnancy or even infant development, things like crawling, lead paint. So when I'm talking about poor housing conditions, I'm talking about the inside of the unit in and of itself.
Mhm.
So put together, these three pathways can perpetuate poor infant health outcomes, leading to things like preterm births or infant or fetal demise after birth.
Yeah. I've heard you refer to this a number of times, but you call quality housing as a social determinant of health vaccine.
Mhm.
You use that term health vaccine. Can you describe what you mean by that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I mean it in the same sense that we think of vaccines. Vaccines function as a preventative measure, right, for poor health outcomes. And that's the same when it comes down to housing being considered to have a function as a preventative measure for poor health outcomes. Vaccines are also known to provide lasting benefits to individuals and to society as a whole. And that's what housing does as well. Housing is protection. Vaccines are protection. So when I refer to housing, quality housing being a vaccine, that's not just me. That's public health experts. Those are researchers showing that when we get vaccinated to protect ourselves and to protect others. It's the same when it comes down to housing. Housing not only directly and quite literally protects us from the elements, but it also protects us from things that lead to poor health outcomes. So, for example, those with stable and quality housing, children with stable and quality housing, are less likely to be admitted into the hospital because of injuries or asthma related issues. There's less likely to be underweight or overweight because they're located in communities that are well resourced, right? So
Mhm.
housing has the impact to drive generational change.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's a, that's really a great way to refer to it. I just, until you had mentioned that, I'd never heard somebody refer to it as a health vaccine, but it just makes so much sense when you you bring it forward that way. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, thanks for explaining that a little bit. I know a number of people times we'll hear people, in our community and in national conversations talk about intersectionality, right? So between different issues and things that you might not always think are connected, finding that interconnectivity between them. And one thing we've been talking about, like intersectionality between home repairs and infant health. And, I just was wondering if you could just kind of speak to that intersectionality a little bit more, and the role that both play.
Absolutely. We can't talk about infant health or health in general without thinking about the intersectionality of all of it. When we talk about the social determinants of health, the various resources in the community, access to these resources, things that provide support for health overall, they intersect. Okay, so for example, when I shared with you the 3 pathways for poor health, we can clearly see then how things like home repairs or other issues regarding the home directly impact infant health. Okay. But that goes beyond just housing in and of itself. That goes to policy, that goes to things like neighborhood built environment, that goes to funding. Who's funding what? Who is putting their money behind programs to make sure that our infants have healthy, safe, quality, affordable housing? When we talk about intersectionality, Chris, I want all of us in our community to think about it this way. If we are not helping our babies get to their first year, they are not going to be a Kalamazoo Promise recipient. They're not going to be in our boardrooms. They're not going to be our city commissioners and county commissioners. They're not going to be our organizational directors, right? These are babies that we will lose and babies that will not be able to shape our society and join our workforce. So we need to do everything that is in our power to ensure that they are reaching their first birthday. Housing is a fundamental pillar in that. We can't have birthing people carrying pregnancies with these toxic environments. Toxic, I mean, physically and quite literally, based off of some of these poor housing conditions that we've seen in our community. It's appalling, but also toxic in the sense of policies and structures that are systemically racist, that are not created to help pregnant people thrive. So when we talk about home repairs, we're talking about giving that environment that is conducive to healthy babies, to healthy pregnancies, because we know that investing in prenatal period and in the early child development period provides the highest return on investment for us. Quite literally, every dollar invested in things like the prenatal environment, housing included, provides $13 to $16 return on investment. So not only is it the morally correct thing to do, it's also a financially smart thing to do.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for putting that perspective. It's so true, and yeah, thank you. We recently, as Community Homeworks, were grateful to receive letters of support from YWCA and Cradle and the Health and Community Services Department through Kalamazoo County. I mentioned this a little bit earlier about this pilot intervention grant that we applied for, aiming specifically with households that have expectant mothers or small children in them. We were successful in this grant, and we are already served one household with these funds. I mentioned that earlier, and we improved our intake process thanks largely to working and talking with you. And I just want to see if you can just kind of speak to this, as just one of the many implementation strategies we're using as a model to better serve families and young families and babies in our community.
Oh, absolutely. Hands down, this is something that other community organizations should take note of. It is very much a game changer for our community. Why? It's because this is an example of systems change in action. This is going beyond sharing resources. This is going beyond educating the community. In public health, there's a few different levels of interventions, right? Some of them are kind of further away in terms of the education, providing resources. That's incredibly important. But when it comes down to making the most change, the most bang for your buck, as it were, would be in things that are upstream. Okay. So I wonder if people have heard about, the parable that we talk about a lot in public health, which is, people saw a stream and there are children floating in the stream, and people are one by one removing these children from the stream until eventually someone starts going upstream and people are like, what are you doing? Why are you leaving when we need you to remove these children from the stream? And someone says, I'm going to go and find out why they're landing in the stream in the first place. That's upstream thinking. And that's what this pilot intervention program is a great example of, which is what can we do to prevent people from having these poor health outcomes in the first place? And if every organization can do what Community Homeworks is doing, which is looking at our policies, looking at our intake processes, and really centering pregnant and parenting people, that could really be a game changer for our community. And then for funders, funding innovative programs like this, because funding is really what tends to be everyone's ceiling, right? We'd love to do this, but we don't have the funds for it. To see how Community Homeworks modeled this pilot intervention, went for the funding, received that funding, and has already been putting that into motion, that's success. That's success, and I love to see it.
Yeah. We have been, as an organization, over the last 2 years trying through and through trying to find reductions in barriers to access, whether it be working with partners to create universal applications, and change can take time. But the thing I'm particularly proud about this too is that, this went from like concept to implementation in less than a year. And, we definitely have to give credit to our grant funder for taking this chance on us to let us try to prove this is going to make a difference. We have a database system where we measure the length of the process from the initial point of entry till when the work is done and the homeowner signs off on the work. And we're really going to try to use this as an opportunity to show as true evidence to the community how much faster we can intervene when you have creative funding sources like this. Because when you're using federal sources, as much as they're a blessing, we are seeing sometimes they can take upwards of like 73 days. Even in a critical home repair situation to get response. And if you hear from, a young parent in the middle of January with a 2-week-old baby in the house with no heat, you don't have 73 days to respond.
Absolutely.
And so what is the alternative as a community? And the alternative in their community was not to just keep continuously getting frustrated by not being able to serve that family. The solution is trying to think outside the box and find a way to, laser focus on a particular segment who was challenged to get resources and support when they needed it most. So really appreciate all of your support and the letter of support to us for that as well.
Oh, yes, it's an honor.
So just kind of curious, in terms of what do you see as the greatest challenges currently facing expectant families and young families in our community?
Oh, there are many. There are many. One of the things that comes to mind immediately is the cost, the rising cost, making families have to make the impossible decision of, am I going to pay for heat or food? That's something that no family, particularly those who are pregnant or parenting young children, they shouldn't have to make those decisions. Yet families are making that impossible decision. We also see barriers around restrictive policies. Some of those policies that we put on ourselves, restrictive policies in terms of things like the heartbeat rule, how many people can be in a room, how many people can be in a unit. And while I understand that some of these are policies that are put in place for things like safety or structural integrity, I really think that we as a community and as policymakers need to look at who are these policies truly benefiting? Because if they are meant to benefit families, well, so should things like inspections and things like landlord accountability. So we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth, right? Other challenges or greatest barriers to accessing or keeping housing is actual housing units available that are affordable. I know that we see housing units sprout up across the community marketed as affordable housing units. But no, are they truly affordable? Are they truly affordable for those who are most marginalized, facing the most barriers to accessing these housing units? I can say with confidence that a lot of the housing units that we are seeing coming up now are not going to support the families that I know are at the highest risk of being in our fetal infant loss cases.
Yeah, those are all great examples for sure. And then in terms of, any other like barriers you really see, do you see any particularly like outstanding barriers that are really impacting people from accessing or keeping their homes or rental housing?
In terms of other greatest barriers are things like the resources that are available, but actually being able to navigate those resources. So, for example, when just at the core of your pilot intervention program in and of itself, it's not that the ideas aren't there, it's that funding to serve these community members is lacking sometimes, right?
Mhm.
And that would be one of the greatest barriers because, for example, if I were a homeowner and I can't afford these critical home repairs, my housing situation is not safe. It is not
Mhm.
quality housing, and that is not conducive to the health and well-being of my family and my children. Yet people will see me as a homeowner and say, "You've got this covered. There's no barriers for you, right? Like you have what you need to have a successful and thriving household." And that's not necessarily the case.
Mhm.
So, in addition to things like costs and restrictive policies and the availability of housing units themselves, some of the barriers are who are we providing the resources to in our community? And are we providing them to organizations like Community Homeworks that can then center pregnant and parenting communities so that they can receive those barriers to reduce the cost that they are facing for things like critical home repairs?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier about like just addressing barriers, and we still have a long way to go as an organization. But I know even early on, like I think the pandemic really like exposed like barriers that existed and just exacerbated them really. And you think about like if you needed to access a computer or a computer lab somewhere, people
Mm-hmm.
even had struggled to access those from a library or from a community center. And so, we even like looked at things like we added an in-house little computer lab station, knowing that people might have had access issues gaining access to and then even just like having our application material in Spanish, or
Mm-hmm.
even just postage. Sometimes people will send out material to somebody but not realize like a book of stamps is kind of expensive,
Right.
and then that means if you have access to getting to the post office or can order them online and stuff like that. And so just even things like that, thinking through, it's so vitally important. And make a huge difference when you collectively address uh, you know barriers in a seismic way. Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Anything that we missed that you would like to share about your work, or anything that we didn't ask about?
Um, we actually have an exciting opportunity for the community to learn a lot more about Cradle, what we do, and some of our achievements and successes over the past year. So, to our viewers, keep an eye open for Cradle's annual meeting that will be taking place this October.
Oh, great. Okay. Definitely. And when we see that out there, we can definitely help blast it out there as well.
Oh, yes.
And then if anyone's really just moved by your work and the mission, and wants to support YWCA and Cradle, what's the best way for them to reach you or to support your mission?
Oh, absolutely. We love the support. The best way to reach would be to email Cradle Kalamazoo at ywcakalamazoo.org.
Great. Okay. Perfect. And I know we're running short on time, and we're running a little bit over, but we always like to have at least a couple of fun questions at the end if you're open to it.
Okay.
So if you had to choose, who is your like Kalamazoo or your local hero, Shiro, someone that you really look up to or admire?
Oh, so, and I don't know if she knows this or not, but now she knows. Now I'm exposed. I really admire City Commissioner Stephanie Hoffman
Yeah.
for so many reasons, but she's extremely dedicated, and she is committed to moving mountains to meet her cause. She's very much an executor, and that's something that I look up to a lot. In addition to that, she somehow balances it with being fashionable and sharp and personable. I just I
Yes.
look forward to I look up to her a lot.
Yes. Absolutely. Do you have a favorite place to eat in Kalamazoo?
Do I? Um, so I spent a lot of time in Egypt. So Cairo is very near and dear to my heart. So Cairo's kitchen in the Exchange Building
Okay.
is one of the places that I think I should just start paying rent at this point.
Yeah, you're definitely so good. Um, And then yeah, I'll just kind of, these are like two complete the questions, complete the sentence questions. Kalamazoo is best at blank.
Oh, finding resources, I would say.
Mhm.
For a small community, we are very resource rich. We find resources from anywhere. Now, do we coordinate them? Not so much,
Yeah, yeah,
but we have them, and I
yeah,
think that's something we should be proud of.
yeah, definitely. And the best kept secret in Kalamazoo is blank.
Well, it's definitely not the breweries. um, so, Kalamazoo was a stop on the Underground Railroad back in the 1800s. And a lot of people, think about Battle Creek, but Kalamazoo was on that map too. And I think
Mhm.
that shows that our roots were based in anti-racism work. And I think that we can get back to that as a community. If in the 1800s we were thinking that way by building a safe house
Yeah,
that helped over 1,500 slaves to safety, we can do that. We can do that in different ways. Again, honor our roots that way.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Kamal, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're got lots going on this week, so we really appreciate your time out with us. I apologize for the technical difficulties that cut us a little short there, but we kept it going still. And yeah, again, really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I apologize as well for the technical issues. But thank you to you. Thank you to Community Homeworks, and thank you to our viewers.
Yeah, of course. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate you guys watching today. We try to do these Let's Talk Housing series, a few times a year as well. And we just recently did one on historic homes and historic preservation at our last one. And so we appreciate you joining us today. We hope you found these useful. And again, if you would like to learn more about Community Homeworks, you can visit us at communityhomeworks.org. If you want to touch base with the YWCA and their work, you can find them at YWCAKalamazoo.org. I really appreciate you being here with us today, and we'll see you next time.